Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. We're going to be diving deep into a topic that's particularly relevant for you UPSC aspirants out there.
Yep, we're talking about infrastructure today, specifically road safety.
Right. And even more specifically, those black spots on the national highways.
Those really dangerous stretches that see a lot of accidents.
Exactly. Ones that cause, well, serious injuries or even deaths. And the crazy thing is a lot of these black spots, they've been identified, but not much has been done to fix them.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so relevant for you future administrators, understanding where those gaps are between policy and actual implementation on the ground.
And to really get into this, we're relying on a great piece from the Indian Express.
Right, a super insightful article. So to start, I guess it's important to clarify what we mean by black spot.
Yeah, it's not just any old place where an accident happens, right?
No, not at all. It's actually a very specific definition from MORTH.
MORTH, the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways.
Exactly. So to be a black spot, it has to have a high concentration of severe accidents, like we said, ones with serious injuries or deaths.
And not just for 1 year either.
Right, for 3 consecutive years. And what makes them so dangerous is that often they're not random.
Yeah.
Meaning there's usually some sort of underlying problem like, oh, I don't know, bad road design, poor signage, stuff like that.
Ah, so it's not just bad luck, it's actually that the road itself is dangerous.
Exactly. And India has a huge problem with road accidents in general.
Sadly, it's one of the highest rates in the world.
And a big chunk of those accidents happen on the national highways, the roads that are supposed to be the safest.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? These roads are supposed to make travel smoother and safer.
And yet, they end up being really dangerous in certain spots.
Which is why this deep dive is so important. We need to understand why this is happening.
And what the government is doing to try and fix it, or not doing.
Exactly. So, let's get into those numbers.
All right, so according to the Indian Express article, MORTH has actually identified a whopping 13,795 black spots.
13,795. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a huge number, and you'd think they'd be rushing to fix them, right?
You'd hope so.
Well, here's the kicker. Only 5,036 of those spots have been properly fixed.
So that leaves, what, over 8,000 still out there?
Yeah, over 8,700. Imagine how many accidents are waiting to happen.
It's a bit worrying.
To say the least. And it makes you wonder why it's taking so long to fix them.
Is it just money? Or are there other issues too?
Well, I'm sure funding plays a role, but it's probably more complicated than that. Like, think about all the different agencies involved. You've got the National Highway Authority, maybe the State Public Works Department, sometimes even local bodies, and getting them all on the same page takes time.
Right, it's not just one group that has to make it happen.
And then there's land acquisition, environmental clearances, all sorts of bureaucratic hurdles that can slow things down.
Yeah, I can see how that would get messy.
It definitely does. And because of all this, it's been moving at a snail's pace.
Speaking of which, it seems like the slow progress is getting noticed at the very top.
Oh, you mean by the Parliament?
Exactly. The Indian Express article mentions that the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Transport, Tourism, and Culture is pretty upset about this whole situation.
Yeah, and for good reason.
They basically called it a governance failure.
That's right. A significant governance failure. Those were their exact words. Oh. It's in the report on the demands for grants for the financial year 2025-26. And this is important for you guys because you need to know how these committees work, what their role is in scrutinizing government action.
So it's not just about fixing roads, it's about the whole system.
Right. And this committee, led by Rajya Sabha MP Sanjay Kumarja, made another really important point.
Which was?
They said these accidents, they're not inevitable, they're preventable dangers.
Meaning they could be avoided if the right steps were taken.
Exactly. And they're basically saying that there's a huge gap between what MORTH is saying they'll do and what's actually happening.
A mismatch, they called it,
Oh.
between commitments and reality.
Right. Like MORTH sets these ambitious targets, but the progress on the ground is just not keeping up. And you see this in a lot of areas of governance. It's not unique to road safety.
So it's good to recognize this pattern.
Definitely. Aspirants need to be able to analyze these situations, see those discrepancies between policy and implementation.
Okay, so the Parliamentary Committee wasn't just complaining. They actually came up with some solutions, right?
Yeah, they proposed a pretty concrete plan of action, a 3-tier framework for tackling these black spots.
3 tiers meaning?
Meaning they recognize that not all black spots are created equal. Some are more dangerous than others, some are easier to fix than others.
So they created a system to prioritize which ones need to be addressed first.
Exactly. And the system takes into account 3 main things. the severity of the accidents, the complexity of fixing the problem, and how many people are exposed to the risk.
Makes sense. The most dangerous and easiest to fix spots should get attention first.
Right. And for each category, they laid out specific timelines for action. It's not just a suggestion, it's a very clear directive.
So for the most dangerous Category A spots, what do they say?
Well, the first step is to implement temporary safety measures right away. Anything that can make the spot safer until a permanent fix is in place.
Okay, so kind of like first aid for the road.
Exactly. But the most important part is that work on a permanent solution has to start within 30 days. That's a strict deadline.
Wow, so no more dragging their feet?
Nope. For Category B spots, the ones with moderate risk, they get a bit more time.
How long?
90 days. So within 3 months, this issue has to be fixed.
Still pretty quick.
Yeah, it's definitely a sense of urgency there. And then finally, for Category C, the lower priority spots, they have 180 days.
So 6 months for those.
Right. But even then, it's still a specific time frame. No more indefinite delays.
I like that they're putting their foot down. And they also suggested something to make sure these timelines are met.
Oh, you mean the penalties?
Exactly. They recommended that if agencies miss those deadlines, they should face some kind of consequence.
Which makes a lot of sense. It's accountability, If there are no repercussions for inaction, why would things change?
So it's a way to ensure that those timelines are taken seriously.
And for you future bureaucrats, this is something to keep in mind. The importance of accountability in effective governance.
It's not just about making plans, it's about making sure those plans are actually followed.
Exactly. And speaking of making sure plans are actually working, the committee had another really smart suggestion.
What was that?
Safety audits.
Like, to check if the fixes are actually working.
Right. They said that once a black spot is fixed, you can't just assume it's all good now.
You need to actually go back and see if the number of accidents has gone down.
Exactly. So they recommended these mandatory audits, one after 3 months and another after 12 months.
To see if those fixes are really having an impact.
Right. And that data can then be used to make further adjustments if needed.
So it's a continuous process, not a one-time fix.
Right. And it shows they're thinking long term. It's not just about ticking boxes. It's about achieving real results.
And to add another layer of accountability, they suggested something else that I really like.
You mean the public dashboard?
That's the one. Basically, they want Morth to create this online platform where anyone can go and see the status of every single black spot.
Yeah, like an interactive map or something where you can zoom in and see what's happening in your area.
Exactly. It would show which spots have been fixed, which are in progress, which are still waiting.
And crucially, it would also list which agency is responsible for each one.
So no more hiding behind bureaucracy. Everyone knows who's accountable.
And that kind of transparency, that public scrutiny, it can be a really powerful tool for change.
Because if people can see that nothing's being done, they're more likely to speak up.
Right, and that pressure from citizens can really push those agencies to take action.
So that's the perspective from the Parliamentary Committee. Now, what about Morth itself? What are their goals?
Well, they've set a pretty ambitious target. They want to reduce road fatalities by 95%.
95%. That's huge.
Yeah, it's a really bold goal. And their deadline is 2028, so not that far away.
And as part of that, they've made some specific commitments regarding black spots, right?
Yep. They've said they're going to fix 1,000 black spots in this current financial year, 2025-26.
1,000. That's a good chunk.
And their ultimate aim is to eliminate all identified black spots by the end of financial year 2027-28.
So in just a couple of years. But, and this is a big but, the Indian Express article seems to suggest that there's a bit of a gap between those targets and what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah, they've got this data. It's in something called Morth's Targets in Reality.web. It basically shows that things are moving a lot slower than planned.
So even though Morth is saying all the right things, the actual implementation is lagging behind.
Right, and it's interesting because the article points out that there are basically 2 types of solutions being implemented.
Okay, like short-term and long-term fixes.
Yeah, something like that. You've got your quick fixes, things like putting up more signs, adding speed breakers, maybe putting up temporary barriers.
So those are meant to improve things immediately, but they're not necessarily permanent solutions.
Exactly. And then you've got your long-term structural fixes, the more complex stuff, like building underpasses, widening roads, completely redesigning dangerous junctions.
Those sound like they would have a much bigger impact.
They definitely would, but they also take a lot more time, money, and coordination.
And those seem to be the ones that are moving slowly.
Right. Which isn't surprising because you've got land acquisition issues, environmental clearances, all sorts of things that can cause delays. The article even mentions that Morth has cited these as reasons for the slow progress.
So it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
But one thing is clear. These black spots are a real problem, and they're putting people's lives at risk.
Right. And it's important to remember that this is not just about numbers and statistics. These are real people, real families, real tragedies.
Exactly. Every accident, every injury, every death, it has a ripple effect. It impacts families, communities, the whole country.
So it's not just about building better roads, it's about saving lives.
And for you UPSC aspirants, this is a key takeaway. It's about understanding the human cost of these issues, the impact on people's lives.
And it's about recognizing the responsibility that comes with being a public servant, the duty to protect citizens and ensure their safety.
Right. And this whole issue, it really highlights the complexities of governance, the challenges of implementing policy effectively.
Because there's one thing to have good intentions, to set targets and make promises, but it's another thing entirely to actually make those things happen on the ground.
Exactly. And you guys, as future administrators, you need to be able to navigate these complexities. You need to understand the obstacles, the delays, the bureaucratic hurdles.
And you need to be able to find ways to overcome them.
Because ultimately, it's about results, not just rhetoric.
Right. So let's sum up what we've learned from this deep dive.
Okay, so first off, we've got a huge number of black spots on our national highways, over 13,000.
And while some progress has been made, there are still thousands out there that need to be fixed.
Right. And the Parliamentary Standing Committee, they're not happy about this.
They basically called it a governance failure and said it was a matter of preventable dangers.
They also came up with a pretty concrete plan for tackling this problem.
A three-tier system to prioritize the most dangerous spots with strict timelines for action.
And they also emphasized the importance of accountability, suggesting penalties for agencies that miss those deadlines.
Plus, they want those safety audits to make sure the fixes are actually working.
And to top it all off, they want a public dashboard so everyone can see what's being done.
Which is a great idea for transparency and accountability.
Right. And then we looked at Morth's own goals. They're aiming for a 95% reduction in road fatalities by 2028.
And they've committed to fixing 1,000 black spots this year and eliminating them all by 2027-28.
But, and this is a big but, it seems like the actual progress on the ground is much slower than those targets.
There's a gap between what's being said and what's being done.
Which brings us to a final thought for all you aspirants out there.
Yeah, something to really chew on.
Think about this. How can we, as future administrators, ensure that those good intentions, those ambitious targets, actually translate into real, tangible results?
How can we bridge that gap between planning and execution?
Because when it comes to something as crucial as road safety, delays, and inefficiencies, they have real consequences.
People's lives are at stake.
So it's not just about ticking boxes and meeting deadlines. It's about finding ways to work smarter, faster, more efficiently.
It's about creating a system that actually delivers results.
And for those of you preparing for the UPSC, this issue of black spots, it's a perfect example of the kind of real-world challenges you'll be facing.
It's about understanding policy, implementation, governance, accountability.
And it's about recognizing that those things aren't just abstract concepts. They have a real impact on people's lives.
And for you guys who found this deep dive useful, make sure to like and subscribe.
Yeah, and leave a comment below with your thoughts, or if you have any questions.
And don't forget to check out the original article from the Indian Express. It's packed with even more details.
That's right. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.
Take care, everyone.